بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back everyone to lesson 3. I hope you guys understood lesson 2 properly. It was a lot. I do give you that. The concepts of the first lesson of usul can be quite tricky, to be honest, and there's not really a way to avoid that. I tried to explain it as easily as I could in many different ways. It doesn't help that the examples from the Quran are also quite tricky. It kind of throws you into the deep end when you start with in usul with these categories. They assume an understanding of logic and a few other things which have to be explained. So anyway, I hope it wasn't too difficult, and I hope you guys can forgive me for making the recordings a bit longer because of that. Inshallah, today we hopefully shouldn't take that long, and it should be a lot easier to understand. It should be a lot less complex. So let's get started with the introduction then. Yesterday we introduced the topic of, or the category of principles to do with linguistic designation. So the Quran, when the Quran mentions a ruling, linguistically, how have the words that are chosen, how are the words that are in the Quran, how do they affect the ruling, right? So yesterday we went over the idea that certain words can linguistically be referring to a specific single thing, specific single object or concept, and some can be universal. And sometimes the Quran has reference to universal things of which it itself specifies. And again, that was kind of like a subcategory under universals, but specifics and universals, that's what we covered yesterday, khas and am. Today we're going to be talking about mushtarak, which are homonyms, words which have multiple meanings, multiple linguistically designated meanings. So we're going to be talking about that, inshallah. And we're going to be talking about when one of those meanings is preferred, it becomes what's called mu'awwal, or interpreted. So the two specific words we're talking about here are mushtarak and mu'awwal, or homonyms and interpreted. And then we're going to be looking at the second category. So then that will be the first category, linguistic designation, done. And we're going to be talking about i'tibarul isti'mal. So looking at words in terms of their usage. How have they been used by the person using them to convey meaning? So the first one was the words themselves. What do they mean linguistically? What do they mean according to the dictionary meaning? Now, the second category we're going to be looking at is in terms of their usage. And in that we've got, they can be used either literally according to their designated literal meaning, or they can be used in a figurative way or a metaphorical way, in a way which is not their literal. So they can be used used contrary to their literal meaning. So we're going to be looking at both of those and the rules and principles associated to them. And then we're going to be looking at usage in terms of how clear or obscure or ambiguous the words that are used are. So a person can say something in a clear way, or he can say something in an ambiguous way. So there are some words in the Quran where the intended usage is very, very clear, or because of usage it's ambiguous, and we'll explain the rulings associated to those, inshallah. And again, as I say always, don't get ahead of yourself. It sounds a bit complicated now that I'm saying in this really abstract way, but I'm just introducing the lesson. And inshallah, through the lesson, it'll become a lot easier with some examples, inshallah. So if you recall our discussion from yesterday, you may remember that we were talking about the categorization of principles related to how words have been designated, how words have been linguistically designated. So we said that if you have a ruling from the Quran, if you have a sentence in the Quran which contains a ruling, then how does the linguistic understanding of that sentence, the dictionary meaning of the words in that sentence, how do they affect the ruling? What do we understand from the linguistics of that sentence, from the literal understanding of that sentence, from the dictionary understanding of that sentence that may impact the ruling, right? So we talked about specifics, so words which are linguistically referring to a specific thing, right? And then we talked about universals, so words in the Quran which refer to a universal category of specific things, right? And the rulings related to each. And then there was a subcategory under universals, so universals which have been part specified, and that has a different ruling. So we discussed all of that. Now today we're going to be talking about another category, another principle related to the linguistic meaning of words, and that is the homonym, the mushtarak word. So if the Quran contains a ruling which relates to, if the Quran contains a ruling and that ruling makes reference to a word which has multiple other designated meanings, or which has another designated meaning, then that is called a homonym or a mushtarak word. So for example, we have the word in English bat, right? A bat can be a object used in many sports to hit a ball, right? In many sports like cricket, baseball, rounders, depending on whichever country you come from, right? And many others, right? Some people even call a tennis racket. Some people call them a bat, which people who play tennis won't be too happy about. Anyway, so you have, that's one meaning. And the second meaning is the winged mammal, right? The flying mammal generally lives in dark places, caves, etc. So you have these two meanings of the word bat in English, right? And both of them are dictionary meanings. It's not like from one of them, the other one became a figurative usage, and gradually over time, people generally began referring to, this thing as this other thing as bat because, somewhere, some other reason. No, both of them are linguistic meanings. The word has linguistically got multiple meanings. Other examples include the word nail. So nail can be the hard part at the end of your finger or your toe, and it can also mean the metal, the iron or metal or steel fastener that's used to join two pieces of material together by hammering it in, right? The nail that you hammer in, that's also a nail. So that's two meanings of nail. Then we've got the word letter. The word letter can refer to a letter of the alphabet, or it can refer to a letter that you write to someone, right? So multiple meanings of letter. Date has actually got multiple meanings. Date can be the fruit that we break our fast with, or a date can also be a specific day in the year, in the calendar year. That's also a date. And then there's a third meaning of date as well, like a meetup with someone. That's also a date. So there's multiple meanings of the word date. So that's a homonym. And we've got many other examples as well. In Arabic, you also have homonyms. In Arabic, for example, the word jariya, or a ship, or a slave girl, right? Jariya is a ship. It can also mean slave girl. So that's a homonym, or a mushtarak word. Mushtarak literally just means shared. So the word shares multiple meanings. Linguistically, the word has been designated to have multiple meanings. Then you've got the word mushtari, which can mean buyer. So in a transaction, you have a buyer and seller. So it can mean the buyer, or it's referred to as the name of a star. So a specific star in the sky, the Arabs would refer to it, or in Arabic, it's called mushtari. And another example is qar or quru. You'll remember this one because we covered it in the previous lesson. Remember, we said that the woman who has been divorced will wait for 3 quru, will wait for 3 waiting periods. And then we said that quru can either mean menstruations or can mean purities. So quru is a mushtarak word. We've come across these types of words in that previous example. Now, a mushtarak word, a homonym, is different to a universal, because a universal has one meaning, right? Universal has one meaning, but that one meaning is encompassing and inclusive of many others, right? Whereas a mushtarak word has multiple separate meanings, right? Hope that makes sense. So for example, the word dessert, right, is a word which has one meaning. It's a dessert, right? It means one thing. But within the word desserts, many other meanings are included, right? So it's a universal, it's a word which universally applies to multiple things. Mushtarak word, meanwhile, separately means 2 different things. Right. So what's the ruling and principle associated to these kinds of words, to homonyms? Or mushtarak words, homonyms, right? So the ruling for a homonym is that it has 2 separate meanings, right? Now, the ruling is that when you interpret one of them, when you have looked at both of them and decided that this one is more applicable, then now that is the one that you must go with, and you must be consistent in applying this one meaning across all scenarios associated with the use of that word in this place, right? So when one meaning is intended, you now can't consider the other one. So for example, if I told you, can you go to the shop and get me a bat? So on your way to the shop, you're thinking, okay, bat, it can either mean, a cricket bat, or it can mean a winged mammal. I wonder which one he intends. And so you think about it a bit and you think, okay, what's he going to do with the winged mammal, right? What's he going to do with the flying winged mammal, right? Is probably the cricket bat that he's referring to. Maybe he wants to start playing cricket or baseball or something, right? So you go to the shop intending to get me a cricket bat. And then you get to the shop and they don't have any. Now, you can't then turn around and say, okay, I'm just going to get a winged mammal. Because no, you decided that there's 2 meanings here. You decided that this one doesn't apply and this is the one that we're going with. Now you can't then, under any circumstance, bring that one back, right? You've chosen this one, you stick with this one. You got to be consistent, right? And another example is, which might illustrate this more, is if I told you to go and get me 2 bats. So you go and you have the same thought, bats, is it this one he means or that one? And you decide, okay, it must mean the one that you use in sports. So you go and get a cricket bat. So you go to the shop and they've only got 1 cricket bat left. So you think, okay, I've got 1 cricket bat, I need another one. He told me to get 2 in order to fulfill the ruling. What should I do? So you think, okay, you know what? Let me go and get the mammal. So then you'll have a cricket bat and you'll have the mammal. I've got you 2 bats. Technically, I'm correct. No, because we said the ruling for a mushtarak word, in order to fulfill the ruling here, you have to be consistent. So I told you to get 2 bats. That means I told you to get 2 of whichever meaning you've interpreted that I meant for bats, right? So you've got to now either get me 2 mammals, if that's what you think I meant, or you got to get me 2 cricket bats, if that's what you think I meant, right? So you can't get me 1 of each, because then you'd be going against the principle. Now, another example of this ruling at play is the example that we did in the previous lesson, quru. So we said that the divorced woman must wait for 3 quru. And we said that most likely this applies to quru. We're going to take the meaning of menstruations and not purities. And the reason was because of the mention of 3 quru, which was specific. And so we have to abide by the Quran's use of that specific phrase. And if you use the meaning of tuhr, if you use the meaning of purity, you're not going to get 3 exact, you're going to get 2 and a bit or 3 and a bit, and you're never going to quite get that, right? And we said that this was assuming that the husband divorces his wife in a purity as he's supposed to, right? Because it's impermissible for him to divorce in a menstruation. So now, and you should have understood all of this in the previous lesson. Now, based on that, now we've agreed already that we're going with the word menstruation. We're going with the meaning of menstruation, right? So now you can't turn around and say, actually, in this specific situation, I'm going to choose the meaning of purity. So let me give you an example. So if, let's say, a husband had divorced his wife in a menstruation, right? Which he's not supposed to do, it's impermissible, right? But he did it, right? Now, the ruling is that the divorce will still happen, but obviously he's done something impermissible. But how do we deal with this situation now? Because this woman's still going to have to do 3 waiting periods, right? And we said that it was going to be 3 menstruations. So how do we get 3? So you say, actually, for this situation, we're going to use purities, because it makes more sense in this situation to use purities. No, that goes against the principle. You're not allowed to do that. We chose menstruation before. We are not going to change for this specific scenario and choose purity, because you're not allowed to use multiple. You're not allowed to use, once you choose one meaning, you can't give any consideration to the other one. So hopefully you guys understand that. Now let's move on to mu'awwal. And mu'awwal is fairly simple. It's basically an extension of mushtarak, of homonyms. So we said a homonym can have multiple meanings. Now, when you've now chosen one of those meanings, you've interpreted this meaning, right? So the word was mushtarak, it was a shared meaning, a homonym. It has now become interpreted, right? It becomes mu'awwal, interpreted. So when we had quru to mean purities and menstruations, and we chose menstruations, so now quru, which was a homonym, now becomes interpreted, right? Once it's become interpreted, the other meaning, right, now ceases to exist, or doesn't cease to exist, ceases to have any consideration. What we've done by interpreting, what we've done by doing ta'wil or interpreting this meaning, is we've now reduced the meanings of this homonym from multiple down to this one. So now how does that change the ruling? Or how does that affect the ruling, rather? Because, we haven't really discussed the ruling yet. So the ruling of, homonyms and homonyms that have become interpreted, the ruling for them is that the interpreted meaning becomes the meaning, right? However, because of the presence of the other meanings and the other possibilities, this is no longer definitive, and now this source becomes speculative, right? So you can't use this source to do specification of a universal, right? And you can't use this source to further specify or universalize something which has been specific, which has been mentioned as specific in the Quran, right? Now you're going to have to recall yesterday's lesson for this, but remember we mentioned that something which is specific can't be made further specific or can't be made universal, right? Unless you have a definitive, definite source, right? And likewise, something which has been left universal in the Quran, you can't make that further specific, you can't specify that or exempt something from that without a definitive, definite source. So over here we have a mushtarak word, a homonym, which has been interpreted, which has been made mu'awwal. As we said, due to the other meaning, due to the other possible meanings, even though we've chosen this one, right, using our ijtihad and using our understanding of the sciences and the word and, you know, the linguistics, etc., and the context, maybe whatever, because of all of these reasons we've chosen this word. But because of there's that possibility, it's no longer definitive, it's no longer definite, absolute, certain, right? There's a possibility, some possibility that your ijtihad may have been incorrect, that the other meaning may apply here. And so therefore this does not remain a definitive source and becomes speculative. So you can't use this type of source now to specify a universal that has been left universal, or to universalize a specific, right? Inshallah, hopefully that makes sense. We move on now to the second category of principles. So we've finished now the discussion of linguistic designation and باعتبار الوضع. We've finished that, right? And now we move on to باعتبار الاستعمال. So we move on to the second way of looking at Quranic sentences and principles associated to that. This one is to do with intended usage, or the usage of the word, right? So if the word is used in a certain way commonly, or if the word is used in a certain way, right, how does that affect the ruling that we take from that word, right? So this can be, as I mentioned before, first of all, there's a number of principles that come out of this. So the first one is to do with haqiqah, right? If the word is used as it was linguistically designated, right, i.e. it's not used in a figurative, metaphorical way, you're just using it according to its dictionary definition, then that word, we take the linguistic meaning. Fairly simple, right? It's really simple, there's nothing hidden here, right? Effectively, if you have the word door and the person uses the word door and everybody uses the word door to mean door, and there's no other figurative, metaphorical meaning of the word door, right, then we're going to take the meaning of the word door. We're going to take it as door, right? Fairly simple. So let's move on. So that was literal. That was the literal, haqiqah, the literal meaning. However, words can also be used in a figurative, metaphorical meaning, or majaz, right? So a majaz is when the word can also mean something else besides what it was linguistically designated for, besides the meaning that was linguistically designated for it, besides the dictionary meaning, right? So the ruling of that is, well, sometimes we take some, it depends, and there's various rulings, and the books of usul expand on the types of figurative and various times when the literal and the figurative have opposing meanings, or when do you take the literal, when do you take the figurative. But in this course we aren't going into that because this is a fairly basic course, and yeah, the ruling is that we can take the figurative meaning as well. And likewise, if that figurative meaning is a universal or a specific, we can apply the same, we can apply the rulings for specific and universal for figurative meanings as well. Obviously, if we're taking the literal, then the figure, then we can take, then we can also look at whether they're specific or universal. So basically, you know what we discussed in the previous lesson about specific and universal, right? Well, they obviously apply if we're using the literal meaning, but if we're using the metaphorical meaning or the figurative meaning, this can also apply. And I'm not going into details here because there is a very long discussion on all of these topics, and the more advanced usul books will discuss these. But like I said, maybe thankfully for some of you, we aren't going into any of that discussion here. So our discussion is fairly simple. You can have words. So the meaning of words, so let's just backtrack a bit. We discussed yesterday, or in the previous lesson, as well as earlier in this lesson, we discussed how words can be, we discussed how to look at words according to their designation. Right now, we're looking at how words can differ according to how they are used. So through common usage, the meaning of words can change, right? And one of those ways is words can be used in a figurative sense, right? So all you need to know is that if the word is used in its literal sense, then we take the literal meaning, and if the word is used in its figurative sense, then we take the figurative meaning. Let's move on to an example. So the word lion, right? The word lion means a certain type of vicious animal, right? A lion. And the word salah is usually used to refer to a specific set of movements which denote obedience, and a certain set of movements, right? The word prayer or salah refer to a specific set of movements. Now, both of these words can also be used in a figurative way. So the word lion can be used to denote bravery. So we can say that was a lion of a man, or we can say he was a lion out there, right? Now, obviously, somebody listening to that is going to know that no, he didn't turn into a lion, right? Or maybe somebody might think that, oh, maybe he went in a lion costume. No, we're just talking about his bravery, right? So this is a way in which the meaning changes. So the linguistic meaning of the word was the animal. So maybe he went in a costume dressed like that animal, right? That would be the literal take. But actually, the metaphorical take, we now have gone away from the linguistic designation, right? And we're using it to denote bravery. Oh, he was a lion out there. He was very brave, right? And likewise for salah, many times in the Quran or elsewhere, in hadith, etc., salah can mean dua. Salah comes in order to mean dua. For example, when we send salutations to the Prophet ﷺ, we are doing dua for the Prophet ﷺ. We use the word salah there as well. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, right? Just an example that came to the top of my head. So both of these, it's permissible to use the metaphorical meaning as well. Now for the final set of principles for today's lesson, or this lesson. If you recall, we were talking about the usage of words and how the meaning changes based on how they are used by people. So this one is more to do with how the usage of words, how the word becomes clear or ambiguous based on usage. So the first principle relates to words which are explicit or obvious, right? Sarih. And I've translated sarih as explicit or obvious, right? But that's not necessarily an intuitive word. But we'll go with it for now, right? Because we're later on going to cover other words which can also be translated as clear or explicit or obvious. So I like generally just saying the word sarih, because sarih, when you say sarih, you instantly know what you're referring to. Whereas if you say explicit, then you could be referring to sarih, or you could be referring to the principle that we're going to explain and discuss in a few lessons time. But nevertheless, I'm going to go with the words explicit and obvious, right? Explicit, obvious for sarih. So if you hear explicit, or obvious, one of the two words, generally I'm going to be referring to sarih, right? This principle here. If I say other words, so there might be other times where I use the words, I don't know, apparent, or we're going to come up with, unambiguous. There's principles related to other words coming up which have very similar meanings, right? And so it's difficult to choose a specific word to refer to this one or another one. So anyway, disclaimers aside, explicit, obvious, that's what I'm going with here. Sarih. Sarih is a word which becomes very clear due to abundant usage. So it's used so frequently, and because it's used so frequently, everybody immediately knows what you're talking about, and everybody instantly understands what you're talking about. So any ruling associated to that word also becomes immediately applicable. And there is no clarification required. So most words generally are clear. If I say I open the door, right? There's no chance that there's no possibility of me referring to anything else. And because people say that phrase so frequently, and they only mean one thing when they say that phrase, right? I opened the door, right? Then when you say I opened the door, generally it can only mean one thing. So you don't need to ask me any other clarification. Now, just thinking about it, can open the door mean anything else? I suppose you can use open the door for enable, or so it opened the doors for him to do this, right? So again, this is a figurative meaning. So I guess open the door maybe isn't immediately explicit or sorry. So maybe that was a bad example. Maybe. So, I sat in the chair. I ate dinner. I ate dinner. I don't think that can be used in any other way. That would probably be an example of something which is obvious or explicit. So, as we said, the ruling associated becomes necessary and no clarification is needed. This is why we call it obvious or sarih or explicit. Now, we can also have words used figuratively and they are explicit in their figurative meaning. So, for example, I have eaten from the tree. Now, if you eat from the tree, literally speaking, the tree consists of branches, branches, leaves, twigs, trunk, and also fruit. But if you say, I ate from the tree, everyone is instantly going to assume and instantly going to understand that you referred to fruit, the fruit that came from the tree, right? They're not going to understand that you ate the twigs or you ate the branches or whatever, because that's strange. And if you did tell someone, I ate from the tree, no, I ate the branches, I ate the twigs, they're going to think you're mad and they're going to think you're crazy, right? You're going to have to use additional clarification to explain that. So this is an example of where the metaphorical meaning of eating, of referring to the fruits, when you say I ate from the tree, you're only talking about the fruits and not everything else. That is a metaphor. That's a figurative use of I ate from the tree, right? So that figurative meaning has become so dominant and frequent and so well understood that it becomes sarih, it becomes obvious, explicit, right? So no clarification is required for when you say that, for everybody to understand that you mean this. So how do we then use this, right? Where does this come into play? there are certain words which have an associated ruling with them. And this associated ruling, because the words that they are associated with are sarih or obvious, the ruling instantly becomes associated with these words as soon as the words are stated, and you don't have to ask for additional clarification. An example of that is when you say the word divorce, right? So divorce has an associated ruling of, being divorced, right? But the word divorce itself is an example of a explicit or obvious word. And when you say to somebody, you are divorced, or oh divorced woman, even if you say it in that way, regardless of how you say it, if you have somehow associated divorce to somebody who you are married to, then a divorce will take place regardless of whether you intended it or whether, regardless, right? You're not asked or you're not requested no additional clarification is requested. The divorce will just happen. The ruling associated with that word will immediately come into play. So you have to be very careful about divorce. When you say divorce, it will happen, right? So you say you are divorced, instantly divorce. Even if you intended something else, you intended a joke, you intended whatever else, right? This is the principle for words which are clear, and or this could be specifically, there are, these rules are specific to certain words here, but this is the principle for obvious words. Now, another example is if you swear an oath. So if you say, I swear by Allah, I swear by Allah, it becomes an oath, right? And if you break that oath, you have to give kafara, you have to give the expiation of breaking an oath, right? Regardless of whether you intended an oath or not, right? So if you say, I swear by Allah, or I swear to God, or anything that can determine an oath, then that oath will become an oath, regardless of whether you intend. You're not asked to clarify anything here. The words used are very explicit and clear, and they're only used for these specific scenarios, right? And so the ruling becomes associated with them as well. So that's the ruling for explicit and obvious words. What about the opposite to that? So opposite extreme, you have words which are enigmatic, right? Or elusive or ambiguous. So generally I'm going to be using enigmatic and elusive for kinaya. So these are words which have kinaya, right? A lot of translations of usul text that I've seen, they use the word metonymic, and I don't like that translation. Again, I'm not a linguist, but it seems that metonymic has a slightly different meaning. However, the word kinaya linguistically comes from, kunya, and a metonym is a very good translation of the word kunya. So maybe because of that. But anyway, I prefer the word enigmatic. You can't use metonymic, I guess. I feel like it doesn't quite refer to what I think the intended meaning is. But again, I could be wrong. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a linguist, but it's from my brief searching in dictionaries and my understanding of the meaning. It seems to have a different nuance. Anyway, kinaya, I'm going to be using the word enigmatic and elusive. What does kinaya mean? So kinaya is when the intended meaning is unclear because it's used in multiple different ways, right? Now this is different to a mushtarak. Remember, a mushtarak or a homonym had multiple linguistically designated meanings. Dictionary usage of this word, the dictionary meaning said it means this and this. Over here, this is a kinaya. Kinaya is a word which can have multiple possibilities based on usage, right? Based on how the word is used. I'll give you an example. Pronouns. So if I said to you, go down the street and he will talk to you. So you're thinking, who will talk to me? He will talk to you. He's there. He'll talk to you. And you're just thinking, who are you referring to? Right? Obviously, he, depending on how I use the word and what the context is and all of these other clues, can refer to many different people. That's the nature of the word. It's a pronoun, right? It's meant to do that. So you're going to have to use external cues and clues and indications to determine exactly what is meant by this kinaya, by this enigmatic phrase, right? So if I said, go down the road, he will talk to you, then the clue would be that, oh, we were previously talking about Zaid. So, you know, we previously were discussing Zaid, and then I told you, go down the road, he'll talk to you. Then you know that most likely the pronoun that refers to is Zaid. So therefore, the point is, when an enigmatic phrase is used, when a kinaya is used, you have to rely on external clues and other indications, or ask the person what they meant in order to determine exactly what the meaning of that phrase is. So another example, if we go back to the divorced example, so divorced we said was a clear, explicit and obvious word, right? Now, opposite to that is the word, if you told your wife you are separated. Now, if you say you are separated, then now you need clarification. Did you mean divorce when you said separated? If you did, okay, a divorce will happen. If you, while you were saying you are separated, you intended divorce, well then now a divorce will occur. If you didn't intend divorce, then divorce will not occur. Or you can look at context. So sometimes at the time of anger, you say, okay, we're separated, right? Then again, you need to, don't take this as a fiqh ruling. We're not in a fiqh class, we're in an usul class. So I don't want to delve into fiqh, but if you say, you can use context as well. In these cases, sometimes the jurist will look at context. So if in the state of anger, or in the state where previously divorce was being discussed, and the man told his wife, you are separated, well then in this case as well, we can use these contextual clues to come to the idea that, you know, divorce was probably what he meant, and we're going to go with that, and that will inform the meaning of the phrase you are separated. So that's predominantly the discussion. And again, there is a lot more detail in more detailed usul books, but we're sticking with the basics here. And inshallah, in later courses, hopefully, we'll cover the detail, inshallah. Or you can read it yourself, inshallah, when you get, when you become big scholars and allamas. Just one final thing. If you have a metaphor or a figurative statement which is not yet widespread, so some people are using this word in a metaphorical way, but it's not very clear, right? That can also be an enigmatic phrase or a kinaya. So an example is like the phrase goat, which especially stands for greatest of all time. Goat. So it's coming up now as in metaphorical usage quite a lot, right? You hear it more and more. You know, he was a goat. He was the goat that day. He was the greatest of all time. And it's like, okay, he was the goat? You know, like the animal goat, or greatest of all time? So again, this could be an example of a enigmatic phrase. However, if this word does end up becoming, very common and widespread, then maybe, who knows, it might end up becoming something with multiple designations. Wallahu alam. So a homonym, eventually, maybe. Like the word gay, for example. Though I think in that one, the literal meaning, the original meaning of happy has basically become deprecated. So we don't really use that anymore nowadays. Nobody really uses that word to mean happy. It's always used to mean the other meaning. So I think over there, you wouldn't call that a homonym. I think you'd just say that you'd say that the designation of that word has changed. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there, inshallah. It was hopefully a much easier lesson today, and we'll conclude. Okay, so just to conclude today's lesson, we completed the final principles related to the category of linguistic designation. So we talked about homonyms. So we said that homonyms are when a word has multiple meanings that have been designated for it linguistically. So its linguistic dictionary definition has multiple meanings. We gave the example of a bat, or a letter, or a date. And in Arabic, we gave the examples of jariya, which means ship or slave girl, both. Or the word qur, or quru, which we covered in a previous lesson, which can either mean purity or menstruation. And the final example we gave was mushtari, which can mean either a buyer in a sale, or it's used to refer to a specific star. It's the name of a specific star. And we mentioned how the ruling of a mushtarak word is that once you've intended one meaning, once you've chosen one meaning, you now cannot ever use the other one. So now for this ruling, this one meaning has been chosen, the other meanings now go out of the picture. So we gave the example of in quru, once we've taken the word menstruations as the meaning, you then cannot bring back its meaning as a purity in any case, right? It's always going to have to mean menstruations from now on for all associated rulings that are based on that word. Then we moved on to when the word becomes called interpreted or mu'awwal. So once you've chosen that meaning, once you've done ijtihad and figured out which meaning you're going to choose, then that becomes interpreted. It's a homonym which has become interpreted, mu'awwal, right? Remember, mushtarak, homonym is mushtarak, which becomes mu'awwal, which becomes interpreted by doing ta'wil, interpretation. So when one meaning of the homonym has been chosen, it becomes interpreted, which means that we've reduced the meaning down from its multiple various possibilities into this one interpreted meaning. And the ruling of that is that this becomes the meaning, right? However, this no longer remains a source of definitive evidence. This evidence is no longer definitive, it's no longer certain, because there exists the possibility of the other meaning. So therefore, you can't use this evidence to specify a universal in the Quran that has been left universal, or something in the Quran which has been mentioned as specific or khas. You can't universalize that, because you would need something which is definitive, and this has now become speculative. Then we talked about the second category of looking at the Quran and principles associated to deriving rulings from the Quran. The second category of those, which is according to usage, the usage of these words. So the first was to do with the linguistic meanings of these words, the dictionary meanings of these words. Now we go on to how these words are used, right? The usage of these words. And so the usage can either be literal or figurative. So if it's literal, then we fall back on everything that we mentioned previously in regards to the linguistic designation if we're using the literal. However, yeah, so if the word is used as it was linguistically designated, we take the linguistic meaning and the literal meaning. And if it's used to mean something besides its linguistically designated meaning, then this is called majaz. The previous one, literal, the word was haqiqah. This one is called majaz. Majaz, figurative, metaphorical. So, if the word is being used metaphorically or figuratively, we can take the figurative meaning. And if you are using the figurative meaning, it can also be used. It can also refer to things which are universal and specific, and those rules can apply as well. So that was literal and figurative, haqiqah and majaz. Then we move on to the usage of the words being explicit and obvious, or that means sarih, explicit or obvious. The usage can be explicit or obvious, or words which are enigmatic or elusive. So we said that explicit words or obvious words which are sarih, they are words which have become clear due to abundant usage in that way. And so the ruling is that any ruling associated with that word will become immediately necessary and immediately binding and immediately implemented without any clarification required as to what meaning was intended for that word. So the example we gave was, I have eaten from the tree. When you say I've eaten from the tree, you instantly know that we are referring to the fruits of that tree and not the branches and the twigs and the leaves, right? And likewise, when a person tells his wife, you are divorced, or oh divorcee, or oh divorced woman, or anything with the word divorce in it addressed to somebody he's married to, then instantly the ruling associated with that becomes implemented. So that woman will then become divorced as a result, because he used clear wordings which have no other possibility, or because he's used clear wordings which through abundant usage is abundant usage tells us that it's used for this thing. And I apologize for going into a bit of detail in this. Finally, we have kinaya, which are enigmatic and elusive words, and we said that this is where the intended meaning is unclear because there are multiple possible meanings through usage. So, for example, if a person said, go and have a conversation with him, or go and he will talk to you, go and he'll talk to you. He's right there, he'll talk to you. We don't know what we mean by he because there's multiple possible meanings through usage, right? We use he said for so many different people, right? It's a pronoun, that's the job of a pronoun. So the ruling of these kinds of words is that you have to use external clues and indications. You have to use external clues and indications to determine exactly what's being referred to. So in the example, go and he will talk to you, you have to use the context. You can use the context of that sentence. Previously we were having a discussion about Zaid, and so when I said go and he will talk to you, clearly we meant Zaid when I said that. So that's elusive and enigmatic statements. And that's also completes the second category. So now we've completed the category of usage, and inshallah next we'll talk about words in terms of how clear they are and how ambiguous and how unclear they are. We'll explain more inshallah in the next lesson.